Hello and welcome to the Sidekick Stories podcast, encouraging conversations about mental health. Today I'm speaking to Flo Sharman. Flo is a mental health campaigner, website content creator and an ambassador for MQ Mental Health, a UK charity that champions and funds world-class research to transform the lives of everyone affected by a mental health condition. Hello Flo, how are you?
I'm very well, Matt. Thank you. I'm delighted to be on Sidekick podcast today.
Well, we are delighted to have you, and I think the goal of today, as we've chatted previously, is to have an open and honest conversation about your mental health journey, to get some insight into the tools and techniques that helps you and might be accessible to other people. And by discussing your journey, we hope that we normalise these conversations about mental health, as often people are not alone in these experiences. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds great to me.
Awesome. Well, Flo, would love to hear more about your mental health journey.
So I'm going to start from the very beginning. I think it's really important to get kind of the whole view of my whole journey. And I always say that my mental health journey is a journey, and I now know it's a lifelong mental health journey. So it all started for me when I was just 8 years old. Which is a very young age and a really important age in someone's childhood.
That's so young.
Yeah, it is really young. And when it happened, I didn't have any understanding of what mental health was. I had no idea what mental illness meant. And I didn't really know what was happening to me. And mine was as everybody's mental health story is, it's completely unique to them.
Yeah. And
mine actually started through physical symptoms instead of just mental illness symptoms. So I basically was a happy-go-lucky young little girl. I am very privileged, from a very privileged background, had a wonderful upbringing and loving parents, and had great home life and loved school, and things were, looking pretty good really. And then one evening, my life completely changed in a complete flash. And I remember the evening so vividly, like it was yesterday, which is crazy really, but it's unfortunately, you remember the good memories, but you also remember the bad memories as well.
Yeah, true.
And that evening, I went from basically being this happy-go-lucky little girl who had not a care in the world, everything to look forward to in her childhood. And then I turned into a completely housebound 8-year-old girl, terrified of absolutely everything, not wanting to live. And basically what happened was I went to bed just like normal, nothing different, nothing had changed. And I woke up in the middle of the night, not being able to talk. I was hallucinating. I was blind. I was paralyzed. It was terrifying.
That must have been terrifying, especially for when you're 8 and you've got no idea how to comprehend these things.
Exactly. I had no idea what was going on. All I remember was sitting on our stairs, and Mummy was sitting on the stairs with me, and she was pointing at her, and she wanted me to say, "Mummy, Mummy." And all I kept saying was, "Heart, heart." And then I kept thinking, what is going on? I am not in my house. I thought I was at school. So I was hallucinating really badly, and also my speech was going, my lip was dropping. It was terrifying. And obviously the ambulance was called and I was rushed into hospital, and they thought at the time that it was a bleed on the brain or a brain infection. And I had so many tests. I remember being in the A&E and in one of the side rooms, and all these doctors and consultants and nurses surrounding me doing all these different tests. And I'm thinking, what on earth is going on? I'm terrified here. And at this time I couldn't talk. I had no memory of where I was. And basically they couldn't find anything wrong. And I remember them saying to my mother that it was a freak-like attack and would never happen again. And that, unfortunately, wasn't the case.
That's terrifying for your mum and parents, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, my mother is amazing, and she is a person that has kept me going, really. And I know how lucky I am to have a mother like her, because without her, I wouldn't be here today. You know, she, I'll talk about this more later, but she basically has saved my life, and she fought for me not to be sectioned. And I can never be more grateful for her, what she has done. And I'm very proud to call her my mum. But yeah, she was terrifying, and she's been through an awful lot with having a daughter that was going through, you know, that terrifying ordeal. And I stayed in overnight, and then I was discharged as if nothing had happened. That event had never happened. I was absolutely fine, but that wasn't the case. It was about a 4-week period that I was literally just spiraling out of control, and I was just free falling into this mental health downward spiral. And basically my world was completely crumbling. And
was that, sorry to interrupt, was that as a consequence of the trauma that you'd faced in that particular night, or was that something that had happened that was going on? There was a process going on in your brain that was causing you to spiral?
No. So basically, that we still to this day don't really know why those physical symptoms happened on that particular night. But what we do know is that it all stemmed from having life-saving surgery as a young baby. So my mental health, those physical symptoms were actually a mental breakdown, but shown in physical symptoms. So it was basically just everything was getting worse, and I was still getting those physical symptoms as well as my mental health spiraling out of control. So I was getting blind, paralyzation, hallucinations nearly every other day, rushing in and out of hospital.
So scary.
Again, yeah, it was very scary. And I think what I want to point out is I still get those symptoms to this day. And, you know, I know that I will always have them now, and I will now know I will always have my mental illnesses, but it's something I live with, and it's something that I have to deal with. But even to this day, it's terrifying. But going back to when it all started, I was having all these attacks, and basically at the time, my parents thought that it was lack of sleep, because I was going to the lovely village school that I was at was actually an hour from our house. So they decided to move schools to a school much closer to our house. But unfortunately, that wasn't the best decision. I was, within 4 weeks of being at that school, I was excluded because of my mental health issues. And at this time, I was being transferred through to CAMS to try and get a diagnosis of what was going and why I was spiraling out of control.
And just quickly, on the school, was the exclusions due to a complete change in behaviour from your perspective? So
the reason, and this is the thing that drives me to be a campaigner, and why I want to share my story, because no child should lose their childhood because of their mental health. And I will never forget the day my mum was called into the headmistress office, and she said, right, Flo has got to go. She can't come back to the school. She's got mental health problems, and we don't want her at the school. And she is scaring the other children with her mental health problems.
That's so sad for you as well, right? As a scared girl, just wanted to go to school.
Exactly. And I love school. You know, I always wanted to be by the teacher and do really well in my class, and I love my friends and playtime and everything. And to be told that when your world is literally crumbling, you're scared of everything, you're not wanting to live, and then to be taken basically away your childhood and being told by the school you can't come to school because your mental illness is scaring the other children, it's horrible. And even to this day, it upsets me now, because, you know, unfortunately those teachers didn't have the understanding of what mental health was. And I think if they'd had the support and understanding, I would have been able to stay at that school and wouldn't have lost my childhood. But I can't turn back the clock on that.
And you've mentioned a couple of times. So for you as a little girl, kind of going to school, school for a lot of us at that age is our life. It's where our friends are. It's where we have the most fun. And you've mentioned a couple of times that kind of not wanting to live. Were those feelings going through your mind at such an early age?
Yeah, so I think it hit to the point about 8.5 that I'd been excluded from my school. I was completely housebound and was actually housebound for 18 months. And I was in a really bad way. And I just thought, actually, my family would be so much better off without me. I can't go to school because of my mental illness. And at the time, I thought having mental illnesses was weird. I was a freak. I wasn't normal, which is totally not the case at all. But I thought that because of the stigma that surrounds mental health. And that was really why I didn't want to live. And I thought everyone's better off without me. And those thoughts continued from the ages of 8.5 to 14. And even to this day, I still get those suicidal thoughts. But yeah, the main reason why I didn't want to live is because I didn't want to burden my parents anymore and not have a childhood, basically. I thought it was better not being here than not having a childhood.
And those suicidal thoughts are, hugely, or the thoughts of not wanting to be here are extremely complicated for when you're an adult and to try and process those, and you need so much support. Like, were you able to kind of get that support, and over the time now, like you said, now the sort of suicidal thoughts are still there? Has it changed in the fact that the thoughts are still there, but any thoughts around action has not, and you're more confident in your ability to cope?
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, basically, I would get those thoughts and I would try and get, a knife out of the kitchen cupboard and sit in my bedroom with it. But my mum has been amazing, and she has always allowed me to open up to her, and I had the strength to be able to open up to her. And there were times when I really didn't want to, but I knew it was a safe space for me to open up and know that actually, no, come on, Flo, I need to live. And actually, what kept me going and kept me wanting to live was that I had the most amazing pony, and he was the only thing that kept me alive, basically, because I knew I've got to stay here because that pony, I've got to look after that pony. And now I still get those thoughts, but I know how to deal with them, and I know the triggers of why I get them, and I know how to put in place, right, this is going to trigger it, so I need to get my coping mechanisms, I need to talk about it, open up, and then let it go. So I'm so much better of spotting the signs earlier, understanding it more, thinking, why am I getting those thoughts, so I can process it much quicker and much easier now than when it first started.
Yeah, and I suppose on those kind of coping mechanisms and the way that you manage those are kind of techniques that you've been able to practice and hone over a long period of time. And I assume that going through that, over the last almost to 20 years, is how do you have those techniques changed? Are you able to process every thought that goes through, or are there some thoughts that are still very challenging?
So I have not only suicidal thoughts and diagnosed depression, I have 4 mental illnesses, so PTSD, OCD, and panic attacks, and suicidal thoughts. So with all those combined, there are so many different triggers and thoughts going through. And often when a PTSD flare-up happens, then it will trigger a panic attack flare-up, and then it will trigger a suicidal flare-up. But the thoughts are still there, and some of them are still very strong, but it is much easier to understand them. And I know if I get a certain thought, I know which coping mechanism is going to help me. And it's definitely, I wouldn't say they've changed over the years, but they've definitely changed slightly in the way of how I use them, how I deal with it. And I use my coping mechanism much sooner to stop it in its tracks, rather than when I was younger, I would use my coping mechanism when it was kind of a breaking point. That's a
really good point about, like, I suppose in some respects you're using them in a much more kind of early stage preventative way so that it doesn't get as bad.
Yeah, totally. And a lot of people, you know, say, who I haven't seen for many years and saw me when I was in my mental breakdown and, you know, nearly sectioned at Tier 4 clinic. I see them now and they say, gosh, you're so confident, you're working in marketing, like what has changed? What was the cure? And I think it's really important for people to know there is no cure for mental illness. You know, there is no cure whatsoever for it. And I haven't just got better with my mental illnesses. You know, they don't just go away, but mine have really improved by using those coping mechanisms. And I'm not afraid to say I am on mental health medication. And the reality is I have been on mental health medication since I was 8.5 when I was diagnosed with those 4 mental illnesses. And the thing is, and it's kind of a scary thought, but I don't really know what I'm like not on that medication. And I'm on 2 antidepressants and quite high doses. And I used to be really ashamed of it and be so embarrassed about taking medication for my mental health. But the reality is it's no different from taking medication for your physical health. And I take medication for my physical health as well as my mental health. So I think it's really important that we open the conversation surrounding medication for mental illness, because there is nothing to be ashamed or embarrassed about. And I think, you know, it has helped me, but it's not been the main thing that's helped me. I say it's one part of the toolbox that helps me.
And it certainly is in a lot of the conversations that I have on this podcast, like the topic of medication comes up, and the majority of people are saying, yeah, it is, when we get the right medication, it is fundamentally useful and part of that kind of holistic treatment for mental health. But then again, the other side is that some people's negative experiences have been when they've been on the wrong medication. And over that very long period you've been on this medication, have you found that there have been some adverse effects, or you've perhaps been on the wrong medication that you've needed to change quite quickly because it hasn't quite gone according to how it was meant to?
Yeah, I remember from probably the ages 9 to 12, I tried so many medications. And it really was a trial and error, really. I had, to the point of one of my medications was making me so nervous and panic attacks were going through the roof and OCD was actually spiraling out of control. So it took about probably, I'd say, 3 years to get on the right medication. And even now, the medication I'm on now, I've been on for the last 8 years or so. But even now, I still, you know, tweak it sometimes, and things do change. But touch wood, it seems to be working and has done for quite a while now.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome to hear. Just on a quick point, like, how do you know? And from me, from a naive perspective, how do you know when you're on the right one?
It's a really good question, actually, and it's quite a difficult one to answer. I would say, and this sounds so say, but I say it's a feeling, and it does take time. But I always say it's like when I'm not on the medication, I'm like, so everything is heightened. My senses are heightened. Everything is basically on, you know, huge watch, and I'm paranoia about everything. On the medication, I'd say it takes a little bit of that heightened senses away, and it brings a little bit of a calmer, more relaxed approach and feeling. That's the best way to describe it. But everyone's different, you know, how they feel on medication will be different for everyone. And
I suppose the opposite question then is, how do you know you're on the wrong one? If once you found your right one, is it because you're not achieving that kind of sense of calm and you know those kind of, I suppose, non-manic events in terms of your emotions?
I think you know when you're on the wrong one when you're getting severe side effects, either, you know, from a physical health point of view or a mental health point of view, and you kind of just know. It's, again, for me anyway, you kind of feel it. If it's doing good, you know you're feeling much better, and you know it's taking, what I say, the edge off things. Whereas if you're on the wrong one, it's not taking any edge off anything.
And that's it. That's interesting. It's effectively like an intuitive, subjective sense of actually, I'm feeling better, and your mind is telling you that, you know, whatever's happening, I'm feeling better.
Yes,
That's really
exactly. And, you know, that medication is like one tiny part of the jigsaw that helps me with my mental illnesses. You know, it's not half of it. It's not one big piece. It's a very small part. You know, there are so many other elements of things that really help me with my mental illnesses and have helped me the past, well, since my mental breakdown at 8 years old. So, and hope will continue to help me on my lifelong mental health journey.
Yeah, well, I mean, and you're what, you know, from 8, are you kind of 20 years past that?
So I'm 22, so,
okay, so slightly less, maybe 15 years.
Yeah, 15 years.
Yeah, that's so those tools have kept you going for 15 years. So in some respect, there's no reason why they shouldn't continue for the next 50, 60, 70, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I hope this way. And things, you know, some of my things, so for me, fitness is a huge part of my life, and it's what I call my savior.
Yeah.
And when I was completely housebound for 18 months, I mean, I wouldn't leave the house at all. I would lock my family and friends in the house. I was so terrified of their safety and them leaving. And the only time I left my house for 18 months, between the ages of 8.5, was going for a walk with my dog or doing yoga in the fields. And that's all I would do. And it's still to this day, long walks are one of my favorite things to do. And I know if I'm going to spiral out of control, if I get walking, which I do twice a day, I know it's going to really help my mental health. And that's what's kind of kept me going and kept me fighting through the most difficult and, you know, tough times. It's, you know, people say to me, how has it been? And the honest answer is, it has been so difficult. The amount of times I wanted to give up and think, why am I keep fighting? And I always think, why me? Why did the world choose me to have 4 mental illnesses and 2 physical illnesses, which is really difficult to cope with. But I always say to myself, it's because the world has given me them, because it knows I have the strength to get through them. And I do know that now, even through the toughest and most difficult times, I know I have the tiny little bit of fight left to keep going and get through it. But walking and working out are my 2 main saviors for me, that really helped me.
And you find that, because you know what you're talking about from what I get in terms of being able to kind of fight through it is a huge amount of resilience, right? And I'd be interested to understand where, from your perspective, where that resilience came from. Is it a resilience of okay, I accept that I've got these 4 mental illnesses, 2 physical illnesses, but I will survive? Is it a primal instinct that is like, I'm going to survive, and therefore the logical step is I need to build resilience in order to do that, and I do it via X, Y, Z? Or is it something that is, I don't know, something that's just very natural and very innate, which is perhaps also based on survival, where it's just like, no, I have made a decision, I'm not going to give up, and I'm going to continue, and that is what I need, that is a strength that I need to carry on?
I think it's a bit of both, actually. And I think it's having life-saving surgery at such a young age. I don't remember it. But actually, that is what caused all my mental illnesses and all my physical illnesses. But we only found that out 4 years ago. And I think knowing the stories from my mum of, you know, me stopping breathing on my christening day and stopping breathing for 8 minutes and being pronounced dead, and then my mum resuscitating me and bringing me back. And I think knowing those stories and knowing that I nearly lost my life at the age of 4 months old, and I have a very big scar to show for it, which was life-saving surgery to save my life at the age. That's what reminds me that I've nearly used all my 9 lives at a very young age, and I need to keep fighting, because I got saved once before, and I know that I can go through the toughest thing, but still keep fighting and go through. And I also think, you know, having an amazing mother by my side, she is the strongest woman I know. So I think I've got a lot of it from her as well. And I think definitely over the last 2 years or so, I know that I make a difference in this world and can, you know, change people's lives and inspire them and help them. And, you know, that's what keeps me fighting. And I do keep thinking, I can do this. I've got through it before. I can do it again. I know it's not going to be easy, but I do have that resilience. And I'd say I've built resilience over the years in bucket loads, really.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it. And like you said, like, you know, sharing your story, you know, doing talks, working with MQ as an ambassador, that reinforces that resilience at the same time. And I, you know, suppose, like, you know, the positive feedback that you're getting there, and also the connection you're having with other people, where they're saying, actually, yeah, Flo, I've been through either something similar, or I've got some part, I can appreciate that. Then that feeling as well just reinforces that momentum. And, you know, in some respects, you know, I find it's funny, resilience is something we speak about a lot, and it seems, you know, what is it is, and I'm sure there's a psychological definition, but the subjective experience of it is something that is something like strong, foundational, and but also at the same time quite dynamic, where it has a momentum of some respect. And, you know, there are periods in your life where you're going through a great time and your resilience is high and you feel like you can go on and go on and go on, whereas there's other times where that resilience sometimes feels paper thin. And I'm sure with you, I'm sure there are, you know, there are times where that resilience does, you know, is challenged.
Definitely. And I always say life is a complete roller coaster ride. And, you know, you have high times, you have low times. And again, with that resilience, sometimes you will think you've got the strongest, most powerful resilience. And other times you think you've got the lowest resilience. But there is always a tiny bit in there that you've always got. But, you know, life is difficult for everyone. You know, it is really tough and challenging. And I think, you know, I've learned to use my resilience, and you know, it's a skill that I'm pleased to have, and it is definitely something I do have. But as you say, sharing my story, it just pushes me more to keep going and fight through, and to inspire others is something that really helps me. And it's actually, I was 18 when I decided not to be ashamed and not to be embarrassed about being a mental health sufferer. It took me 10 years from the mental breakdown for me to feel that way. But it actually was a real turning point in my recovery when I started to share my story, because I actually thought, well, I can turn this really bad negative into a really good positive and share what's helped me. So yeah.
And how did that happen at 18? Because I know we spoke about earlier, going back in the chronology, you got up to 12 in terms of like trying a lot of that medication. What was it like from 12 to 18? Because that's, you know, secondary school, and that's also a very tough time. And you mentioned at some stage that you had some difficulties. Your mum saved you from being institutionalized, being sectioned under the Mental Health Act. What you know, what's that experience over that period like, and then what turned in your mind to change it from a negative to a positive?
So I haven't been to school since I was 8. I was homeschooled and did all my GCSEs.
Right. Okay. And was that by your mum, or was it tutors and?
No. It was tutors through the local authority. I was unbelievably lucky. I had the most incredible tutor who still to this day, we're family friends with her. But between the ages of 12 to 16 was still very challenging and very difficult. You know, the other day actually, I was clearing out some stuff as we're doing in this lockdown. And I earned a certificate for going on the motorway for one junction and not trying to jump out of the car. And that was when I was age 13. Oh, wow. And, you know, it shows how bad I was, but also how far I've come. So, you know, it wasn't, I'd say the real turning point was between 17 and 18. Things were getting a lot better. And it's going to annoy probably a lot of people for me to say this, but time has been the greatest healer for me.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was actually the point when I was probably 12, when I stopped putting pressure on myself to get so-called better and gave myself time and did it in my own way and challenged myself in my own little steps. So challenges to go in the car for more than one junction, to go into shops 3 hours before it was going to be closed because I was terrified about being locked in. And I challenged myself in own little ways. And then I, you know, had done my GCSEs and I was doing really well with Open Study University. And I kind of just thought, I'm going to really own my mental illnesses and I'm going to share my story. And I don't know what it was, but it just something changed and something switched. And yeah, I just thought, no, I'm gonna really share my story and inspire others, basically.
And I mean, that's incredible, especially from, if you say, like, you know, coming from a homeschool perspective as well. And I don't know much about, okay, other than I know that lots of people are doing homeschooling now, but back then it was certainly less less usual for people to be homeschooled unless under specific circumstances, like you said. And I'm assuming that because of homeschooling, maybe the ability to kind of make friendships and relationships was stymied slightly, because obviously I assume your interactions were less, or was there a very conscious effort to kind of keep you connected with good relationships around you with friends and family?
I mean, I basically had no friends whatsoever. I'm not gonna, you know, say I did, because I didn't. And I had no children of my own age to be friends with. And when I was excluded from my school, I lost all my friends because they thought that I was not normal and was this weird freak person with mental illnesses and was nearly sectioned. So I didn't have any friends really up until probably 14, 16. One thing positive I take from it is that I had a lot of adult company. So I've always, you know, been very confident in conversation with adults and have learned that, because basically that's all I had to talk to. I didn't have anybody my own age really to be friends with. But I was very fortunate to have horses and ponies. So I was very lucky to have a pony club. So I did have friends there, but it took a lot of time for me to make really good friends and friends that were understanding. You know, they were there through the good, but they were also there for the bad. And now I have a very small group of friends, but I know every single one of them is there through the great times, the tough times, the really difficult times, and will support me through everything. And that's what I value so much. But I didn't really have any friends, to be honest. In my childhood, I don't have any friends from my childhood. And my only friends when I was younger were my animals, really. And that's what I love so much. So yeah, unfortunately, I did miss out a lot.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it, but also at the same time, you're like you said, you're really 4 or 5 years kind of past that, and speaking to you now, you know, you certainly come across as a very, you know, very confident, eloquent, articulate individual, not necessarily someone who is, you know, certainly, you know, shy or reclusive in any way. And is that something that's changed? And I know you mentioned before when we were getting set up, you mentioned, you know, your boyfriend was helping you get on. When it comes to forming those kind of romantic relationships as well, was that something that you in the last 5 years it seems to have gone very quickly? You know, what you've described to us in terms of like before 18 was a very different life to what perhaps you have now, and that's happened and occurred very quickly.
It really has. And, you know, I am very lucky. My boyfriend is so supportive, and, you know, I had some very bad and not very nice relationships, and some horrible things happened to me over the last 5 years, kind of in a romantic way. And I found it very difficult, and I was very scared to open up to anybody that I was going to form a relationship of having mental illness, because it's just there's that stigma that still surrounds it. And I was just so embarrassed still, really, to open up and say, yeah, I do have mental illnesses. You know, I do a campaigning, I'd share my story, but when I was getting into a new relationship, I'd hide behind it, and I wouldn't say that I was a mental health campaigner or an ambassador and what I've done, because I thought, oh my gosh, what are they going to think? But it's actually been the last 2 years that I actually thought, being me is the best thing I can be. And if the right people needs to be in my life, they're going to love me for everything, mental illness and all. And I think that's what everybody should learn. You know, being your true self with everything is what you need. You don't need anybody in your life who doesn't want to understand what you've been through.
And it's about it's the quality, not the quantity of those relationships, isn't it?
Definitely. You know, I'd much rather have a small group of friends who are there for me at all times, rather than a massive group that I have to, you know, there's only a few that will support me through the bad times. You know,
100% agree on that. And I mean, it's something that it's a question which has kind of emerged over the last kind of few episodes I've been talking about. So you know, the reason we're having this conversation is to have open and honest conversation to kind of challenge the stigma around mental health. And you know, the stigma around mental health is talked about a lot at the moment, and has done for the last 5 years. And it's brilliant that loads of, you know, more people like yourself, Flo, are talking about it. But at the same time, like you said, like in certain situations, people still hide behind it. And I'm certainly getting a sense that whilst there's a lot more talk about it, I can't quite work out whether, whilst the awareness is there, I'm still thinking that there seems to be no necessary decline in the statistics, which goes to say that actually, whilst having open and honest conversations is very important, there's still a lot of work to be done to kind of challenge the underlying kind of mental health crisis that is permeating society. And you know, if you look at the stats and you think about how are people how these mental health issues and illnesses emerge as a consequence of maybe their kind of genes, environment, society, how that happens is something that still needs to be addressed. And I'd be interested to hear your kind of thoughts and comments as a campaigner on that, because like you said, you've had a situation where both you're fighting the stigma, but also you would hide behind that stigma at the same time.
I'm so pleased you asked that question, because, you know, talking is great, and it's amazing that over the last, as you say, 5 years, conversations have got better, and, you know, we are being more open about mental health. But there is still so much work that needs to happen. And I always say, you know, actions speak louder than words. You know, we need to get mental illness treated exactly the same as physical illness. And that's not just going to happen by talking about it. You know, change needs to happen. Different things need to be put in place in, you know, society, in schools, in hospitals. You know, it needs to be treated equally. And I believe that the only way that mental health crisis is going to get better is if it's treated equally. And there's still so much work that needs to happen surrounding that. You know, for me, because my mental breakdown happened when I was so young, I believe it is vital and so important that, you know, teachers and support staff in schools get training and understanding of mental illnesses, so they can spot the signs, so that people's mental illnesses aren't going to go down and down and down and decline, and then they get to their teenage years or 18 and stuff and completely crumble. They've got a plan in place and can understand why what they're going through and their mental health and stuff. And I think, you know, we've come so far in the last 5 years surrounding mental health, but actions needs to happen. You know, we need to get so much more change happening. I mean, talking is great, and talking is what really helps me and helped me in my recovery, but we need to get proper things in place to stop those mental health crises. Because as you say, you know, it's still happening, and it's getting worse and worse and worse, really. And the conversations are happening, but it's still declining in mental health crisis.
Yeah, and it seems to me, and I think this is part of the reason why we set up and created Sidekick, because our experiences as a community, and those who, you know, within our community have struggled with their mental health, has been the fact that there is a lot of support and services out there. There definitely is. Access to those support can be often difficult. There might be barriers to that, maybe monetary if you're going privately, or you can't go privately, you're going on the National Health Service or wherever you are in the world, the relevant services, but there's an enormous gap or waiting time, and therefore how are you going to help this? And I think what you've really shown, the conclusion that we've come to, is that actually there's an enormous amount of simple and free things that you can do as an individual, as long as you take onus and you prioritize it, that you can do to build your resilience and prevent some of the worst things happening. And of course, when those worst things do happen, then you are able to get specialist support through specialist interventions, which are available, thankfully, in the UK. But it's something that, there needs to be a lot of, a need for, like you said, not just a conversation, but habit building, about making sure that every day you're doing the things that you like to do or love to do, that fire up your brain, to make you passionate, to exercise so that you've got, you've got a goal, you've got a purpose, you've got endorphins flowing through your body. From your perspective, like those tools and tips, like what's helped you? Because like you said, you've been through a huge amount. So I'm thinking that understanding your daily habits could be really insightful to other people listening, to say, okay, if this is what Flo does, this is what I could do. And, I think, doing this will allow me to build some sense of resilience when the bad times do come.
So yeah, I always say I have my mental health toolbox, and there are 3 key things in there, and these 3 key things I probably do on a daily basis. And I even know if I haven't done these things for 2 or 3 days, my mental health starts to spiral. So I know how important these things are for me, and what the things that I call my mental health saviors, and will get me through even the bleakest, darkest, toughest times, and know when the light will start to shine again. Those 3 things are the outdoors: walking, hiking, running, being with my horses and my dogs. Fitness, whether that's Pilates, HIIT training, strength training. For me, I love doing crazy fitness challenges, and having that goal, and having, doing those challenges. I did during lockdown, I did the 3 Peaks challenge, all in one go on a treadmill without stopping in one day. Wow. Yeah, and I was delighted with the time I got. And those challenges, you need mental strength and physical strength. So that's what pushes me to train for things like that. And thirdly, talking. I share my emotions with those around me. I feel my emotions. And this is something that I think I've really learned in the last year or 2. It's really important to cry. It's really important to feel angry. It's really important to feel every emotion you're feeling, because if you bottle them up, it's going to get so much worse. And I know in the early days, I used to hide behind the biggest smile and bottled all my emotions up. And people used to say, oh, Flo, in pictures, she looked like the happiest as a girl, whereas inside I was crumbling. So now I know that if I'm feeling down, I feel those emotions, I do my fitness and I do my walks, I write down about what's going on in my head, and then I try. Most of the time it works. Those thoughts go away because I've felt the emotion, I've done the things that help me, and I keep going, basically. And I think that's really important. And definitely, I only 2 days ago, I was sobbing my heart out because I had a really bad attack and of my hemiplegic migraines, and I was having tremors, I couldn't see, I was paralyzed. And I just thought, why me? Why am I doing this? But I cried, I spoke about it, and the next day I was so much better. So I really encourage people to feel their emotions and exercise. Getting those endorphins are the best thing ever.
And I think, like, from your perspective, I suppose the question maybe for someone listening might be, okay, how do I feel those emotions? Because, obviously you do feel things day in, day out, but sometimes people who necessarily, maybe it's the first time that they're starting to think about kind of their own mental health and kind of the kind of internal awareness, is how do you start to, let it out and cry and be angry in a way that is, I suppose, kind of, I suppose, within a safe space and a non-judgmental space at the same time, because that could be very difficult for people being so vulnerable.
Definitely. I think I'm very lucky to have a very supportive family and partner. And I do have a safe space at home, and I will often do it on my own. And I think it's really important when you need to let out your emotions and feel those emotions, don't hold it in and don't bottle it up, but also it's really important to do it in that safe space. And I always say, I have this throw that I love, and I put calming music on, or music really helps me to let out those emotions. So they're my top tips: safe space, cozy environment, and music to let emotions out.
And actually, I think that's very comforting, literally comforting, but also at the same time, emotionally comforting as well, to think that actually, okay, it doesn't necessarily need to involve another person. It can be, you can really just, as long as you've got a space, doesn't matter how big it is, where it is just you, and you feel safe, cozy, like you said, and are able to kind of, surround yourself with good music, and comforting things, then that is a great start.
Yeah, and I will admit, I've cried on walks on my own. I've got angry, and I luckily live in the beautiful Cotswolds and in the countryside. So I'm often in empty fields on my own. But if I feel angry and want to scream, I scream. And it's just being able to do it and let it out. It's taken a few years to get to that point, but what I will say, and if you're feeling really sad or suicidal or feeling very depressed, I would say feel your emotions and let it out, but do talk about it with someone who isn't going to judge and is non-judgmental and you feel safe with. It's really
and I think if people are listening who are struggling with that, and they're saying, okay, well, who can I speak to? I haven't got anyone to speak to. There are a lot of services out there, and I think the one in terms of suicidal thoughts, I myself used to be a Samaritans volunteer, so the Samaritans is a good shout. Papyrus is another one. I'm sure, Flo, you know some services as well, but there are a lot of services out there which really can support with these very difficult feelings, and especially during this time in lockdown, as well, because so I assume that whilst being in the countryside in lockdown enables you to still continue on your kind of your day-to-day life. It is still very difficult for a lot of people, right?
It is so difficult. I was sitting on the sofa last night and I thought, I've not hugged my dad since March last year. And my father lives in London, so we're in the Cotswolds, so it is really difficult. And everybody is dealing with lockdown in their own way, and it is tough for every single person, and no matter what situation you are in. I'm very lucky and very privileged, but I'm still finding it tough. It is not easy, and we've all got to be kind to everybody. We're all dealing with it in our own way, and we've got to be kind and non-judgmental through, lockdown is tough, but so are you.
Yeah. Well, I think that is an excellent moral of the story to perhaps kind of close on. And Flo, thank you so much for not only a fascinating and insightful chat, but just being so open and honest, and just sharing some of perhaps the most terrifying times of your life. What I find amazing is that it's almost like I'm speaking to a person who is reflecting on another person. It seems so far removed from the person that I'm speaking to right now, that some of the things you've gone through, and it can only give you enormous support in your continued journey.
Thank you so much, and I'm delighted to have been able to share my story with a sidekick and hopefully inspire others and know that you're not alone and you can get through anything the world throws you.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly summed up, and thank you to everyone who is listening. You can subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms: YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Just search for Sidekick Community or Sidekick Stories and we'll pop up. And please do give us a rating if you like the show, and do check out our free Sidekick app for iPhone and iPad. It's a collection of interactive exercises, tools, and tips to help you boost your mental well-being. The app enables you to build a personalized well-being toolkit to help you deal with life's ups and downs. Just go to our website, www.sidekick sidekick.org.uk and click the download now button in the header to take you to the App Store. Flo, thank you so much again.
Thank you.